It was supposed to be just another ordinary morning in America. The kind of morning every parent takes for granted. The sun had just begun to rise over rural Texas farmland, casting a golden haze across miles of open fields. The air smelled faintly of cut grass and diesel as the familiar rumble of the school bus rolled down the dirt roads, collecting children who laughed, shouted, and waved as they climbed aboard. For the parents, it was a scene they'd watched countless times before, backpacks swinging, shoelaces untied, voices bubbling with excitement about recess and lunchboxes and who sat where on the bus. Some mothers stood in their driveways sipping coffee, others waved through the kitchen window, never imagining it would be the last time they saw their children alive. Inside the bus, the atmosphere was alive with chatter. 27 kids, ages 6 to 12, squeezed into the worn leather seats. Some argued over crayons. Others pressed their faces to the fogged-up windows, racing the rising sun. And at the wheel sat James Walker, a middle-aged driver with a spotless record, loved by both kids and parents. To everyone in that quiet Texas community, he was reliable, trustworthy, safe. Nothing about that morning felt unusual. Nothing hinted at the darkness that was about to unfold. But somewhere between the last stop and the elementary school, the bus disappeared. It didn't just break down. It didn't just take a wrong turn. It was gone. Completely. By the time the school bell rang, teachers grew uneasy, then worried. The principal called Walker's radio. No answer. The first parent phoned the office asking why their child wasn't in class. Then another. And another. Panic spread through the hallways. What started as confusion quickly twisted into dread. By mid-morning, the small-town sheriff had been notified. Deputies retraced the bus route, driving mile after mile of dusty road. Neighbors stepped out of their homes to ask what was happening, only to drop their jaws when they heard the words, "The bus never made it to school." As hours ticked by, the town transformed into chaos. Cars lined the roads. Parents abandoned work and flooded the countryside in desperation. Helicopters circled above, their searchlights cutting through the fields. Volunteers on horseback combed through pastures and woods. Farmers drove their tractors along creeks, calling out children's names. And yet, there was nothing. Not a tire mark. Not a backpack. Not a sound. It was as if the earth itself had opened up and swallowed the bus whole. By evening, the fear was unbearable. Parents huddled together at the school gym, tears streaming down their faces, voices shaking as they begged for answers. Some clutched photographs. Some prayed aloud. Others sat in silence, staring at the door, waiting for their children to come running back. And then, a shocking discovery turned confusion into horror. 15 miles away, on a lonely dirt road that wasn't anywhere near the bus's scheduled route, a farmer spotted a man stumbling out of the brush. His shirt was torn, his pants caked with dirt, his hands trembling like he'd seen a ghost. It was the bus driver, James Walker. The farmer rushed him into town, where deputies swarmed him with questions. But what Walker said, and what he couldn't say, would deepen the nightmare. His eyes were wide, glassy. He looked hollow, almost broken. He claimed he didn't know where the bus was. He didn't know where the children were. In fact, he didn't remember much of anything at all. The last thing he recalled was driving along the familiar route, listening to the children laugh in the back seats. And then, nothing. A black hole in his memory. Sheriff Daniels, a hardened lawman with decades on the job, leaned across the table and demanded answers. But Walker's response chilled everyone in the room. "They're just gone," he whispered, his voice cracking. "They're all just gone." Doctors examined him that night and made a disturbing discovery. His blood showed traces of a substance no one could immediately identify. It wasn't alcohol. It wasn't drugs. It wasn't anything they could put a name to. But it was there. And it raised terrifying questions. Had someone drugged the driver? Was he part of a larger plot? Or had he been a victim himself? By the second day, the case had outgrown the small-town sheriff's office. The FBI rolled in, their black SUVs kicking up dust on the gravel roads, their agents stone-faced and silent. Search dogs sniffed the air. Helicopters scanned from above. Volunteers continued their desperate hunt. But day after day, no trace of the bus or the children was ever found. And then the story began to change. When reporters demanded updates, FBI spokesmen offered vague, calculated statements. This is an ongoing investigation. We cannot release details at this time. We are following several leads. But what haunted parents most wasn't what the FBI said, it was what they refused to say. Files were sealed. Questions went unanswered. And whispers spread like wildfire. Some claimed strange vehicles had been spotted tailing the bus days before it vanished. Others swore they'd heard helicopters in the early morning hours that didn't belong to any local base. And there were darker rumors, whispers that officials were hiding something, that the truth wasn't just tragic, it was unspeakable. For the families, the silence was unbearable. They demanded answers, only to be met with closed doors and carefully worded statements. Why were the FBI files sealed so quickly? Why did agents order local law enforcement to stand down? And most of all, how could a school bus carrying 27 children simply vanish in broad daylight on American soil? To this day, no one has ever given those families an answer. And that leaves us with the most chilling question of all: what really happened on that bus? The morning after the disappearance, the town of Willow Creek, Texas, no longer felt like the same place. Streets once filled with the sounds of children riding bikes and chasing each other were now crowded with police cruisers, FBI vehicles, and satellite trucks from national news outlets. The disappearance of 27 children was no longer a local tragedy, it was a national headline. And yet, for all the attention, answers remained painfully absent. FBI agents set up a command post inside the high school gym. Families gathered there every morning, desperate for scraps of information, clinging to hope that the children might still be found alive. Agents in dark suits whispered to one another, carrying files behind closed doors, emerging only to offer the same phrases: "We're doing everything we can. We're following all leads. We ask for your patience." But the patience of grieving parents has limits, and every passing day without answers felt like another betrayal. Theories began to swirl like wildfire. Some investigators believed it had to be an abduction, a carefully planned operation by multiple people. But if that were true, how could they have moved an entire school bus without a single witness? No tire tracks, no abandoned vehicle, no fragments of paint, nothing. Others whispered of organized crime, cartels, even foreign agents. But again, why children? And why here, in the middle of nowhere? And then came the most disturbing rumor of all. Some locals claimed that the FBI themselves were hiding evidence. An anonymous deputy told reporters that the bus driver's clothing had been taken by agents and never returned. That certain items found along the roadside, scraps of fabric, a child's shoe, were dismissed publicly as unrelated but never seen again. And when journalists filed Freedom of Information Act requests, they were told the files were sealed indefinitely. Why would the FBI seal files on a missing children's case unless there was something they didn't want the public to know? The pressure mounted. Parents marched to the sheriff's office demanding answers. "What aren't they telling us?" one mother screamed, pounding her fists against the desk. But the sheriff's eyes told the truth his lips never would, even he had been cut out of the investigation. The town's law enforcement had been told to step aside. Whatever this was, it had risen far above their pay grade. Meanwhile, investigators dug into the driver's background. James Walker had no criminal history. No debts. No enemies. He was quiet, punctual, the kind of man who spent his evenings watching TV and fixing things around the house. To those who knew him, he was incapable of orchestrating such a crime. And yet, doubts remained. Walker himself stayed in a hospital under observation. He often woke in the middle of the night screaming. Nurses reported him mumbling in his sleep, repeating words like lights and voices, and they took them. But when pressed while awake, his memory remained blank. Some believed he was faking. Others believed he had been drugged, perhaps hypnotized. But by whom? And why? And then something strange surfaced. A truck driver passing through the county on the morning of the disappearance claimed he saw a convoy of unmarked vans speeding down a back road, not far from the bus's usual route. The sight struck him as odd. There was no reason for a line of identical white vans to be traveling together in that area at that hour. When he reported it to authorities, the FBI dismissed it as irrelevant. But for the families, it was fuel for suspicion. What if the children had been taken alive? What if they were transported somewhere, hidden, trafficked, erased from the world? The mere thought was unbearable, but the absence of evidence made every nightmare feel possible. The case took another chilling turn when the media uncovered a strange coincidence. Just 3 weeks before the bus vanished, another small town in Oklahoma, less than 200 miles away, had reported a suspicious vehicle loitering near a school bus stop. Witnesses described it as a black SUV with tinted windows, parked for several mornings in a row before disappearing without explanation. Local authorities filed a report, but nothing ever came of it. Could this have been connected? Or was it just another cruel coincidence? The questions piled higher, the answers thinner, and the pain deeper. Parents stopped sleeping. Marriages strained under the weight of grief. Some mothers refused to clean their children's bedrooms, leaving toys scattered and clothes folded neatly on beds, as if waiting for their little ones to walk back through the door. Fathers who once worked the fields abandoned their jobs, instead spending their days driving the same roads over and over, searching for something, anything, that could explain what happened. And yet, in the middle of that pain, a darker whisper began to circulate. A whisper that terrified parents more than death itself. Some people in Willow Creek believed the children hadn't just been taken. They believed the children had been sacrificed. Talk of cult activity had always lingered on the edges of Texas folklore. Strange gatherings in the woods. Symbols carved into trees. Pets that went missing and were later found mutilated. Usually, these stories were dismissed as superstition. But in the shadow of the missing bus, they suddenly carried weight. A group of hunters even claimed to have stumbled across a clearing deep in the woods where strange markings were burned into the ground. They reported it to the sheriff, but he said the FBI took over that lead and nothing more was ever heard about it. The silence from authorities only made the whispers louder. And with every rumor, every unanswered question, every strange sighting, the people of Willow Creek began to wonder if the truth was so dark, so unspeakable, that it had to be buried forever. But the most chilling part? As the weeks dragged on, not a single body was ever recovered. Not a single shred of the bus. It was as though 27 children in one massive yellow school bus had been erased from existence. And yet, some locals swore the case wasn't cold. They swore the FBI knew exactly what happened. That somewhere, hidden deep in sealed files, was the truth of that morning, a truth too explosive for America to ever hear. The question is, what could be so terrible that the government would rather silence grieving parents than reveal it? Months passed, and the small town of Willow Creek became a place frozen in time. The playground at the elementary school sat empty, swings swaying gently in the wind. Rows of desks remained untouched, lunchboxes collecting dust in cubbies, textbooks still open on pages where children had last left them. The laughter that once filled the hallways was gone, replaced by silence, grief, and a wound that refused to heal. The search for the missing bus never truly ended, but it grew quieter. Fewer reporters came. The helicopters stopped circling. Volunteers returned to their lives, though none of them were ever the same. And yet, for the families, the nightmare only grew louder. Every empty chair at the dinner table, every unopened birthday gift, every photograph of smiling faces became a cruel reminder of what had been stolen. Some parents clung to hope with a kind of desperation that broke hearts. They left the porch lights on every night, believing their children might still come home. Others found themselves drowning in anger, not just at whoever took the children, but at the authorities who sealed the files, who offered no answers, no closure, and no justice. Rumors of cover-ups turned into bitter conviction. "They know what happened," one father shouted at a town hall meeting. "They know, and they're not telling us." The FBI remained silent. The case remained sealed. And that silence left room for the darkest theories to grow. Some believed the children had been kidnapped for human trafficking, taken across borders, their identities erased forever. Others swore the entire disappearance was linked to a cult operating in the region, a cult that had been rumored for years but never exposed. A few even suggested something stranger: military experiments, government programs gone wrong, or phenomena that couldn't be explained by science. And while many dismissed those theories as fantasy, one fact remained undeniable: the truth was hidden, locked away in files that no ordinary American would ever be allowed to read. Years turned into decades, but the scars in Willow Creek never faded. Parents grew old without answers. Brothers and sisters grew up haunted by the memory of siblings who vanished before their eyes. Teachers retired with guilt, believing they failed to protect the students entrusted to them. And the bus driver, James Walker, spent the rest of his days in a shadow of confusion, his mind fractured by whatever happened on that road. He died never remembering what became of the children. And yet, the story refused to die. Every few years, it surfaced again. A retired FBI agent hinting at things he wasn't allowed to discuss. A journalist discovering a lead that suddenly went cold. A rumor of new evidence that always seemed to vanish as quickly as it appeared. And through it all, the families continued to fight, to push, to demand. They never stopped asking the question that America could not answer: how can 27 children and an entire school bus vanish without a single trace? But even in the darkest mystery, a flicker of hope always remains. Advances in DNA testing, satellite imagery, and digital archives have reopened cold cases once thought unsolvable. Could technology one day uncover what happened in Willow Creek? Could some forgotten clue, buried deep in sealed FBI files, finally see the light of day? Could the voices of those children, silenced for so long, finally be heard? For now, the missing school bus mystery remains one of the most chilling unsolved crimes in American history, a story of loss, of secrecy, of unbearable pain, and of unanswered questions that continue to haunt. And as we close this story, the final words aren't mine. They belong to one of the mothers, speaking through tears at a town vigil years after the disappearance. Her voice cracked, but her message was clear: we will never stop looking. We will never stop asking. Because they are our children. And someone, somewhere, knows what happened to them. Her words still echo through Texas. Through America. Through every parent who has ever put their child on a school bus and trusted they would come home. The truth of what happened that morning may never be revealed. The FBI files may remain sealed. But one thing is certain: the story of the missing bus, the 27 children, and the silence that followed will never be forgotten. And now, I ask you, what do you believe happened on that bus? Was it an abduction? A cover-up? Or something far stranger? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. If you found yourself gripped by this story, if you believe mysteries like this should never be silenced, subscribe to this channel for more true crime stories that demand to be told. Because the more we remember, the harder it becomes for the truth to stay hidden.